Welcome in. It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy on Twitter /X at Blake Murphy7. My normal co-host, Marcos Labrada, is not here today, but instead joining me, we've got, there's two people, I think, at least around the holidays, who are busier than anyone else, it seems. There's the jolly old elf up north.
Yeah, right.
And then coming off of taking calls until midnight, covering on Arizona sports, having the Arizona Football Daily podcast, and being a Cardinals pre and post game host is Tim Ring. Tim, it's good to have you in here. Thanks for making time on a Saturday to talk some Cardinals Bears.
Blake, it is my pleasure. You asked me to do this. Yeah, we were trying to figure out what was wrong with the Suns last night until about midnight over on Arizona Sports. 98.7, obviously fans are not happy, and now I'll shift into Cardinals mode for the Bears game tomorrow. The pregame show gets going at 10 o'clock and then jump back over to the Suns for the Christmas night game against Luka and the Mavericks. But the opportunity to do this with you today, you've always been there for me when I've needed you. So it doesn't matter that it's been a busy time. You need me. I am here for you, my brother. Let's do it.
Always here to be with Arizona sports. There's obviously been a rough year, unless you're a Diamondbacks fan, but we can talk at least about this Cardinals team because, Tim, a year ago when we talked, it was something I won't forget. The Steve Keim in the middle of our recording ended up leaving, at least due to the health reasons from where it was.
Yes, I forgot about that. I forgot about that. That news broke while you and I were recording a show. That's right, that he was taking a leave of absence.
Yeah. And since then, it has been such a difference for the Arizona Cardinals as far as they brought in a new general manager, a new head coach. And that's, I think, where we can at least kick off today is that the Cardinals came into this season with essentially three big questions. You have a new GM, a new coach, and you're bringing back Kyler Murray when he was going to be back. How would he look off of the ACL? Do you have a front office? Do you have a coaching staff? And do you have a quarterback? Let's start at least just with the general manager, because Monty Ossenfort comes in. This is a 3-11 Cardinals team. They have not looked good. They have not looked like a good team. This was not built to be a successful Cardinals team. They're kind of taking their lumps knowing that Kyler was hurt. How do you feel like what we've seen with Monty Ossenfort this draft class? Can Cardinals fans at least be more confident that we're not going to see difficulties as there was at the end of the Steve Keim tenure? That is part of why he's no longer with the franchise and they moved to a new direction.
Yeah, Blake, it's interesting. Not all 3 and 4 win seasons are created equal. I mean, last year this club won 4 games and we were all at our wits' end, right? I mean, we were disgusted with the direction of the franchise. See, Steve Keim wasn't showing up to work, ultimately takes a leave of absence. Cliff Kingsbury was the head coach. Obviously, it's still at this point last year, but it was completely unraveling under his watch. You kind of had the feeling he was going to get let go when the season came to a close. I mean, there was so much dysfunction. I mean, if you recall a year ago, not only were they losing games, but you had the infamous, Kyler Murray, swearing at Kingsbury on the sidelines. But there was more to it than that. Not only the Steve Keim issues in the front office and what was going on there. I mean, you had Eno Benjamin fighting a coach, getting, cut immediately from the football team. You had an assistant coach arrested before the game, before they took on the 49ers, in Mexico City. You had DeAndre Hopkins obviously yelling at Kyler Murray during games and, basically telling the Cardinals he wanted out. I mean, all those issues that plagued a locker room that went beyond just losing football games. Now you have a football team that's actually not even doing as well on the field this year. But I think the complexion, if you will, the chemistry of this team and the direction of the team is so much better because you got a GM in Monty Ossenfort and a head coach in Jonathan Gannon and 2 coordinators. And what's interesting about it, Blake, is they're all first timers, right? I mean, none of these guys have a proven track record in their current positions at all in the National Football League. And they're all relatively young guys. And not that age, matters this day and age, but still, I mean, these are all guys somewhat at the beginning of their career that got opportunities to sit in the big chairs of their respective vocations. Monty moves up from a long, career in working as a scout and behind the scenes to the GM spot. And Jonathan Gannon gets a head coaching job at the age of 40. And Nick Rawlis is really young and Petzing's not that old either. But you just get the feeling in watching this team, Blake, and I know I'm not alone in this, is that, not once did you watch the Cardinals play this year and thought, man, they were totally outcoached. I mean, they were not prepared to play. They had no concept of what the other team was doing. For the most part, they lost these games because they just didn't have the horses. They didn't have the talent. I mean, take away the Browns game, because that obviously was the Clayton Tune disaster where they never had much of a chance. And, they were probably out schemed at times in the second half of games. I think back to the Rams game at SoFi, where they kind of ran all over them in the second half, and Rollis and the defense weren't prepared to handle that. But by and large, for the most part, I think most Cardinal fans are pleased with the coaching staff, the way they're prepared to play, the way they compete. And I think Monty Ossenfort, what he did with the drafts, his very first draft, was pretty impressive. And now they're set up for success in the draft next year. So compare it to a year ago, when this was ultimately a 4-win football team. And I think at the end of the year, this is going to be a 3-win football team if you get right down to it. I think they're in just a much better place going forward. And I think a lot of people are going to be excited about what Monty Ossenfort can and will do in the 2024 draft, because that'll be, again, the backbones of what this team does going forward. And I expect them to be more aggressive in free agency as well. Certainly more aggressive than they were last year.
No question about it. No, last year it felt like the coaching staff was having to work with one arm tied behind their back from how they handled free agency in a lot of ways.
Oh.
Some of these players have not worked out as well, but whenever you're losing a talent like a DeAndre Hopkins, and you're not necessarily replacing that talent with one of these elite, highly drafted picks, when you're trading back from a Will Anderson type in order to say, hey, we need to get a protection in for a quarterback because we're going to be a run-heavy offense, you really feel like that the fact that guys have still put forth the effort, have been out there for the most part, that this coaching staff has been willing to sit players this season. And like you said, if it was a first half, was all you played of football games, who knows what the Cardinals' record might be, because they
totally right. And I think that speaks to the coaching
half.
staff. Yeah.
And when they've been dominant in that first half, and then you see in the second half, it's almost like coaches go, wait a minute, okay, we're better than this. We're going to throw the ball to Jamar Chase. We're going to run against these, third string defensive tackles Arizona's throwing out there with Kyron Williams. It's been a place where you don't feel negative, at least, about the job that Monty has done. You don't feel negative about what we've seen from the coaching staff. If anything, you feel like this had to be one of these, have to plow the fields, bring it down to nothing so you can plant again and be able to see the seeds of this team grow back. And that's something that I think we have not seen in Arizona, as far as having a down season now to have a better setup of success and knowing why we're doing what we're doing moving forward, which I think a lot of people did not expect that Jonathan Gannon was going to bring from Philly, whether that's from how that Super Bowl is remembered or from some of those interviews or video clips, I should say, from ahead of the season, where a lot of people felt like he was just going to be laughed at, be knocked out of the park. And instead, we've seen the Cardinals have been playing hard for their coach this year.
Yeah, hey, let's be honest. Jonathan Gannon made some missteps in the transition from Philadelphia to Arizona. And I think he learned a hard lesson that words matter, and you can't just flippantly say stuff in press conferences, because people will fact check you and you will be called on the carpet. You're a head coach in the National Football League. You are no longer flying under the radar. And again, I think it speaks to the fact that I think he's a younger guy, and sometimes you can kind of get away with, just, making cracks and saying things that you think will just kind of, again, fly under the radar, and nobody will really care what you say. But people do care what you say, and people will follow up. And again, like I said, they'll fact check you. And I think, he stepped in it a few times. So yeah, you wonder about, where he was at. Was he ready to be a head coach? But I think once it really mattered, and all that really matters is, are you getting your team prepared to play football? Are you leading men, right? I mean, most NFL players will tell you, everybody knows X's and O's. Everybody knows X's and O's in this league. Every coordinator, every head coach. That's not it. That's not what separates the great coaches in the league. It's what separates the great coaches is, can you lead men? Can you get them to play and compete at a high level each and every Sunday? And I believe Jonathan Gannon in his first year has shown that he can do that, because he's taken an undermanned and underfunded team for the most part, and he's competed. I mean, the Cardinals haven't been embarrassed all that much, right? I mean, they've had some issues in some games where you knew they had no chance to win the football game. But I think overall, Jonathan Gannon has really shown some coaching chops, and that's been impressive. Now, but that only goes so far, right? At some point, they need to up the talent level, and then he's got to show that he can go out there, go toe to toe with the Shanahans and the McVays, and he can beat those guys, and he can win football games. And are we going to see that in 2024? I know Cardinal fans hope so. I hope so. And you figure with another solid draft, I think they have 6 picks in the top 80-ish, something around on there. And Mike Bidwell breaks out the checkbook in March for free agency. You plug some holes that way. And Monty Ossenfort has shown, I think, the ability to hit on picks a little more than Steve Keim, or a lot more than Steve Keim, that maybe this team can improve. Even if they improve, Blake, to a 500 football team next year, judging by this year, 500 now has you squarely in the playoff race. And I think that, right?
Yeah, weak NFC, such a weak NFC overall. So you will be at least competing for a playoff spot if you can take some of those losses that the Cardinals had that were very one-sided, make some of those competitive, and then the close losses, outright winning some of those games. That's the step forward I think that this team can take. And who are the people who are going to be part of that? Are going to be, of course, the offensive coordinator, Andrew Petzing, who has established this Kevin Stefanski run-first type of offense that we have seen produced, despite maybe not the most talented offensive line, at least not in terms of draft capital, some free agents, Paris Johnson, obviously, and DJ Humphries standing out. And then Nick Rallis, who is 30 years old and constantly reminds me, at least, that as a 31-year-old, that there's always more that I feel like I could be doing with my life. So
don't think that way, Blake. Don't trust me, as somebody who's quite a bit older, don't get caught up in that, because you're going to see a lot of younger people in your life passing you by. In terms of status and salary, and you need to get over it.
Just do what you got to do. Be the best you can.
You be the best Blake Murphy you can be, and you go to bed happy every night, no matter what you're doing or what you're making.
Well, that's with Nick Rallis. Like, he is right now being the best Nick Rallis he can be, which is essentially being forced to play without a Kaiser White, still going out and being able to get a win against the Steelers on the road, being able to at times have some unique and different looks, and for the most part taking this chicken bleep and, at least maybe it's not a great chicken salad, maybe it's more of like it's
edible, but it's
an
edible chicken salad. And you think about it, I mean, they played quite a bit without Budda Baker this year. They played without Jalen Thompson. They have really nobody to get to the quarterback. I mean, I know Dennis Gardeck's a nice story, and we all love the fact that he kind of was undrafted and he plays with so much heart and passion. But I mean, come on, at the end of the day, I mean, if he's one of your starting edge rushers, that's probably why, in part, I mean, I'm not putting this on Gardeck, but you know what I mean? Like, you got to upgrade there. I mean, for example, Gardeck still leads them in sacks, Blake. He's got 5, I think, or not think, I know he's got 5. 3 of them came in the first 2 weeks of the season. Now,
last
3
weeks,
four of them, right, and 4 of them
sacks.
came in the first 4 weeks of the season. So their leading sack guy has done nothing since week 4, and he still leads the team. So, can Ojulari be a guy like that? Dimukeji, I think, has been here long enough that he is who he is. But Ojulari is a guy that you think has some upside that might be able to get to the quarterback. So, again, for Nick Rallis, Blake, let me tell you something. In terms of salary cap, the Cardinals' defense was the most underfunded defense in the NFL this year, and it 100%. Wasn't close. Now, that doesn't guarantee playoffs or Super Bowls or contention, because I believe the most funded defense was the Chargers, and look where it got them. That's probably why their GM in part got fired too. So, but what I'm saying is,
no question,
right? So when they set out, some Cardinal fans bristle at the whole tanking thing, and they're not tanking. They're out there. Look at, they're playing hard. Nobody ever said they weren't going to play hard. But the people that use the word tanking, and if you don't want to use the word tanking, fine, don't use it. But the fact is, they were the most underfunded defense in the National Football League this year. They did not go out and spend the money, the money it takes to try and be a playoff team. That Monty Ossenfort's game plan was clearly to sit back and focus on the 2024 draft this year, judging by the talent he put out there on the field. They got to rebuild the cornerback room. There's no question about it. I mean, outside of Garrett Williams and I don't know, maybe Cottrell Clark. I'm not sold on Thomas yet. He's kind of just a guy right now, but he's playing because they got nobody else. They got to rebuild the edge rushers. Zaven Collins, is he even going to be here next year? The defensive line, I know they were better with Watkins and Collier, but again, those are they're Jags, right? They're just a guy. They're better.
They're rotational players, but when it comes to impact starters, it's hard to see anyone like that in this Cardinals front seven, unfortunately. And even with B.J. Ojulari coming in, he's clearly hit that sort of rookie wall that rookies will hit. And as a result, we're also seeing teams are now running the ball with much more frequency on Arizona, knowing there's no Kaiser White back there. They're down to, whomever they can get off of the practice squad having to go in. Dante Stills is having to play a lot more than a 7th-round pick probably should have. And Marco Wilson, who the team was at least counting on to maybe not take a step forward, but to at least be competitive enough for the most part at cornerback to see if you could bring him back. And there's been multiple metrics where whether it's man coverage, zone coverage, he's been in like the bottom of corners in the entire.
Oh, he became unplayable. I'm just looking right here. They're the opponent's rushing yards per game. After last week, the Cardinals are giving up 139.6. It's 31st in the league. So that rushing defense. Blake, I mean, outside of Baker and Thompson, and Stills looks like he might be a player, and Kaiser White's going to be back. Obviously, I think that's been a nice pickup for them. You could make the case the Cardinals could have 6 to 7 new starters on defense next year, and probably should. So, what we see now, I mean, these are the seeds of what Monty Ossenfort wants to ultimately grow and build on that side of the ball. I mean, they just, I mean, statistically, I mean, how many points are they giving up a game? They're giving up, what is it? Let's see, how many points are they giving up a game? They're giving up 26.9, which is 31st in the league. I mean, so they are rock bottom in points allowed and rushing yards allowed. So, and I think it's too simplistic to point to the Kaiser White injury or the LJ Collier injury or the Carlos Watkins injury. No, they need an influx of talent. Now they need it on both sides of the ball, but since we're talking defense, I would expect the Cardinals, I know we're going to get probably to the draft in a little bit, but I would expect the Cardinals, if they stay at 3, to probably go Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3. And I'd be shocked if they did not take the best defensive player on the board. If it's an edge rusher, great, so be it. With that Texans pick later in the first round, that's the way. That to me would be a perfect first round. First round.
And I think part of what we said about this season was we knew what the defense had been. The Cardinals, the only team worse than them against the pass is the Washington Commanders. They're 32nd. The only team worse than them against the run is the Denver Broncos. Cardinals are bad against the run and the pass. So you're talking about pretty much an entire reset on the defensive side of the ball, which is where coming into this season, a lot of people wondered, is that part of adding a Will Anderson now? And we've seen the trading back, getting future draft capital, being able to restock with more talent. It will be interesting to see how Arizona will go about it, like you said. But I think a lot of this season also came down to one other question with this Arizona Cardinals team, and that was, do they have a quarterback? Kyler Murray was coming off of an ACL injury, running quarterbacks coming off of ACL. And I said coming into the season, Tim, I said, this is not a fair grade for Kyler Murray because every quarterback, it seems, coming off of that injury, usually the passing yards increase because they added a receiver. You look back at Carson Palmer, Sam Bradford, RG3, who had an awful knee injury. All of these guys coming off of that, they got worse as far as it came to running the football. They took more sacks, couldn't get away from guys the same way. And they were usually throwing more interceptions because they were having to, like we've seen in some cases, just are not on a good team for the most part. So I said, all right, it's not going to be probably a fair evaluation of Kyler, but you know what? The National Football League is never fair. It's the no fair league, if you want to call it that way. He's going to have to prove himself one way or the other. And for what we've seen with Kyler Murray so far, we've seen at least that the Cardinals are probably not in a place where you're looking at this going, oh, he's out, they have to replace him, feeling like there's this negativity. I don't think that people are feeling that Kyler Murray's going to go out there next year and put up MVP type numbers like he was doing at the start of 2021. But it does feel like we're at least in this spot where there is maybe a decision to be made, and maybe the Cardinals won't have that decision to make depending on where they're picking. But it does feel like, in a lot of ways, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it would be a mistake moving forward, at least from what we've seen so far with Kyler Murray. Even if some fans aren't sold, it does at least seem like he's proven himself enough in a new offense, getting the ball to Trey McBride, being able to at least show that there's at least still something there as far as why the Cardinals paid him. And it's something I think coming into this season, we did not know one way that we didn't even know if he was going to play at all this season. And I think a lot of Cardinals fans, maybe it's part of that is we just haven't had those expectations for Arizona, and maybe that's part of the problem. But how do you feel like Kyler, at least, and especially in case of looking at this as a long-term decision for Arizona, seems to be at with this team and with this franchise?
Well, it's interesting in this regard, Blake. This conversation would have a lot more juice if they were staring at the number 1 pick or even the number 2 pick, right? Because then you got the two guys potentially on the board that many feel can be generational quarterbacks in this league. Now, I get it. There are no sure things. Drake May and Caleb Williams could be total busts. How many top 3 quarterbacks have been taken in this league that can't play a lick? So I understand that. But if the Cardinals were sitting there like, what the Bears are going through with Justin Fields right now, I mean, they're staring at Caleb Williams right now, so they've got that decision like tangibly to make. The Cardinals don't have it. So you take that off the table. I mean, Monty Ossenfort's decision, unless he is thinking about taking Jaden Daniels, I mean, there is no decision to make. So you turn it back to Kyler Murray now. And also, Justin Fields doesn't have the long, big contract. Kyler Murray does, which complicates things, even more for the Cardinals, even if they wanted to get off Murray and they had the number 1 or number 2 pick. The problem with Kyler Murray is, Blake, the way I see these last 5 games and what may happen in these next 3 games, certainly Kyler can play a certain way and change perception. But I look at what he's done so far in 5 games, and I kind of look at it like this. If you were anti-Kyler Murray and think the Cardinals should move on and don't think he's the answer and will never win a Super Bowl, you probably still feel that way after 5 games.
Yeah.
If you are in the Kyler Murray camp and you feel he's not the issue and you can win with him and you hold on to the 7-0 start and believe that guy still exists as long as he gets some weapons and gets a good offensive line and has a competent coaching staff, if you believe that guy still exists, you probably still feel that way after 5 games. But overall, I think through these 5 games, even with a couple of wins, he's been pretty nondescript. He just has. He hasn't played poorly, but we haven't seen those Kyler Murray moments either that defined him in early 2021, where he was, without question, an MVP candidate. I mean, he was running around making plays. I mean, he looked like a combination of Patrick Mahomes and Randall Cunningham and Brett Favre. I mean, he was sensational.
Lofty comps. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, seriously, go back and what
MVP conversation was happening. Yeah. They won that crazy game against the Vikings where I felt like neither defense was just playing that day, and they were staying step for step with each of those other high-powered offenses up until, of course, we all know where it went from there.
Like, he was not only running the football and throwing it, but he was extending plays in the pocket. He was dropping dimes. He was reading blitzes. I mean, think about that Titans game. I mean, off the back foot, hitting Christian Kirk, to beat the all-out blitz. I mean, but there were, plays where he's just, he's on the run. He extends the play in the pocket. He rolls out and he drops a dime 40 yards down the field, right along the sidelines. I mean, those plays define that start. Now, he doesn't have the weapons this year that he had in 2021 either, so how do we judge that? I mean, the receivers have been non-existent. I mean, you talk about rebuilding a room, they got to rebuild the receiving room. I mean, as you know by now, I am the farthest from a Cardinal fanboy there is in the local media. I want them to do well. But just because you put the Cardinal jersey on doesn't mean I'm all in with you. I mean, Rondell Moore, I've seen enough. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't mind the flyer on the pick and what he did at Purdue, and he's explosive. But I mean, there's been ample time here for him to be an impactful NFL player. And outside of that 7-0 start, when teams weren't quite ready for what Cliff was going to do with Rondale Moore, outside of that 7-0 start, he's not been an impactful player. Hollywood Brown, bring him back as a number 2 if the price is right on a 1-year prove-it deal. Okay. Michael Wilson, a lot of people love him because he's 6'2". Okay, there's a lot of guys that are 6'2". I mean, at some point, Michael Wilson has to prove that he can be, a starting wide receiver or a competent wide receiver in this league. And I'm sorry, outside of a couple of touchdowns in week 4, he hasn't done that yet either. And he's got durability.
Availability is the other thing. It's the number one most important thing that you can have as a football player is you got to be available to play. He's missed 3 games. We knew that he was going to come back because otherwise he would have gone on IR and missed 4. And he came back and had 0 catches last week in the effort where we got to see the teams. Now, the good news, of course, is for Kyler, there's at least one weapon that he has had, which is Trey McBride, who has emerged and in multiple ways is now leading the NFL since he took over in terms of with yards, catches. He looks like he's at least a cornerstone piece you can work around on offense because teams know the Cardinals don't have receivers. They're going to throw the ball to Trey McBride and they're going to run the ball. And they're still not able to stop Trey McBride, which has been a relief to Cardinals fans who waited 34 years to have a 100-yard receiving game from a tight end and then had to wait 1 month to get the second one for the most part. And obviously, it's still a couple of games that we've seen. But it does show at least that, hey, if you're looking for pieces moving forward, you at least are like, all right, we know what we've got in Buda Baker. You know what we've got at least as far as with Jalen Thompson. You know what you kind of have at least with some of these offensive linemen. You at least have a selling point in the likes of a Trey McBride. But I agree with you. Like, if you were able to take the likes of Rondale and Greg Dortch and stack them on top of each other, like 2 guys in a trench coat as far as with size, it might be a better fit for what Kyler Murray is. Because let's be honest, he is a shorter quarterback, and a lot of this Cardinals offense, as we said, is going to be throwing these timing routes over the middle of the field, playing in the pocket, and he's clearly made an effort to play in the pocket. But when it comes to that decision as far as where it goes, there is definitely a question of, is it like the chicken or the egg? Is it the talent around the quarterback that's needed? Is it the quarterback who creates that talent? And I think that there's a mix that you have to look at in the National Football League. We've seen Justin Fields get a DJ Moore and actually play better as an NFL quarterback than he has previously. And you can look at Arizona and say, yeah, this is a team that doesn't have anyone who can get separation, whether it's on the outside or from the slot outside of, a couple of different designed deep throws that we've seen. And so then when it comes to making this decision, I agree with you that if Cardinals fans want to take their Cardinals fandom and be able to actually see the team improve, you sometimes have to take off those bird-game colored glasses, set them to the side a little bit, and be able to critically look at a team.
Yeah, and Blake, and that goes for Kyler Murray too. I mean, there's a lot of people in the local media where Kyler Murray can do no wrong. It's never Kyler's fault, and sometimes that's accurate, and sometimes it's not. Kyler, in terms of like Kyler Murray not hooking up with the wide receivers, that's a great conundrum, right? First of all, it's going to be very easy for them to look at the all-22 and figure out what the problem is, right? I will say this: Kyler Murray has shown a history of throwing to wide receivers throughout his career, so I don't think he just woke up, a month ago and said, I can no longer throw to wide receivers. I can't see him over the field. So to me, I believe it's a Hollywood Brown injury thing and a Michael Wilson, experience thing, or maybe overall talent thing, and a Rondale Moore. I just don't think Rondale Moore's ever been effective going down the football field consistently and catching the football. And, Zach Pascal, I'm not even sure why they signed the guy. And Greg Dortch, again, journeyman guy, love the story. But again,
slot wide receiver 3-4. He's not on the field as much as people I think always said, oh, play more. And I'm like, I agree, but you also got to recognize he's a small 5'7" guy. And when it comes to run blocking and things of that nature, you're going to be pretty quickly run over for the most part if you're going to be looking at a balanced offense. So it's knowing, can you put him in a place to succeed? And we've seen him step up, but at the same time, you always got to recognize that these aren't like the Avengers or superheroes. They are the closest thing to the gladiators and superheroes that we have. But guys are still going to be able to get hurt, and you're still going to have a 260-pound type of guy who's going to be running at a receiver, depending on how the line goes. You're going to want to get a tight end on that guy. That's part of why Trey McBride is able to and effectively be on the field so much, is because you don't necessarily have him as a liability when you're trying to have to get these two tight end looks, use play actions. He can then be able to block. We're at least seeing a lot more of a approach from this Cardinals coaching staff that does have intentionality, whereas with Cliff Kingsbury, I said there was a boost to your offense for a while, but after a bit of time, when you spread teams out and then you're having to win these one-on-one matchups, you got to have the talent that can win those one-on-one matchups. And instead, we've seen the Cardinals kind of be able to embrace a team mentality that's gotten guys like Amari DiMercato a lot of rushing yards when he's been able to take advantage. We've seen them be able to get some plays at least and move the ball down the field. They're top 10 in rushing. Right now, they're 7th in rushing. And I don't think many people would have expected that. The Cardinals, after having the crazy year that James Conner had in 2021, he's actually been more efficient whenever he's touched the football this year on a per run basis, not having the same type of yards per carry as he did then. But Cardinals are in a very different spot than they were in that 2021 team. Now, getting back to the Kyler area, I've also been a little bit more balanced where I've said, I don't know how if I fit into either of those Cardinals camps you've described. Like, there's the, hey, Kyler does no wrong, it's everyone around him. And then there's the, man, like, you got to move on from this quarterback. I've kind of been in that middle camp of, like, I don't think that Kyler has been at a spot where you have to move off of him. But realistically, looking at some of these taller and maybe more affordable quarterbacks as far as picking 1 and 2, it would be a very interesting decision for Arizona to have to make, because obviously they didn't draft this guy. We've seen, I think, a lot of ways that this isn't one of those places where you're like, all right, this is like, you're looking at Daniel Jones, who after one kind of semi-all-right year just seemed like the entire offense collapsed. You don't feel that way with Kyler Murray. Like, you feel like he can come back, he could start, he might be good enough to make the playoffs next year, while at the same time, you also would say that these are two pretty highly touted quarterback prospects. Caleb Williams obviously has been, making crazy plays, while at the same time, there's a lot of that Cliff Kingsbury offense. You've seen him in this year, where he's just kind of scrambling, looking, waiting for someone to get open. And we've seen Drake May, who's probably more of that pro-style guy. Maybe he doesn't have that laser rocket arm, but he's still got a cannon, and he's making some great plays over the middle, still has some legs. It's part of why the Chicago Bears, despite what we've seen with Justin Fields, may be looking to move on after this season. And it's fascinating that we're talking about this matchup, and there's a lot of similarities. There's two athletic quarterbacks who are wearing number 1, and a lot of fans are arguing over whether the team should keep them next year or should move on. They also are very run-heavy offenses that we've seen them have to play in. It's very interesting seeing these two teams. It's like that Spider-Man meme, or a mirror reflection of each other, that are going and playing this year against each other in this Christmas Eve game. And that's really, I think, a fascinating storyline coming in, as we've talked about. Is Kyler the guy? Where Chicago has that same question. Is Justin Fields the guy for them?
Yeah. And it also seems to, at least amongst the fans, fluctuate week to week. I mean, if you were to ask Bear fans a couple of weeks ago, should they keep Justin Fields, I think the tone and the tenor would be, yeah, they should keep him and draft Marvin Harrison and maybe get a new head coach and, give this kid some weapons and let him grow. But then after last week, I mean, yeah, they scored a couple touchdowns, but one was on a pick 6 and one was on an interception that set him up, I think, inside the 5-yard line. Fields couldn't orchestrate anything. He's missing guys. And, you listen to former Bears players that really know the game, that kind of analyze the team from a post-game show standpoint. I mean, they are incredulous with the amount of receivers that Fields misses downfield. And, Blake, the big difference is not only do the Bears have the opportunity, it looks like, to draft a Caleb Williams, where the Cardinals don't, is that there's a contract difference, obviously, very easy to get off Justin Fields. But the other thing is, keep in mind, as much as Kyler's been criticized and he's much maligned at times amongst the fan base, and we don't know what Monty Ossenfort really thinks of Kyler Murray, not yet anyway. Kyler Murray's far more accomplished as a quarterback and a passer than Justin Fields, far more. Now, it doesn't mean either guy is ever going to win a Super Bowl, But what Kyler Murray's done in his career, it's no comparison in the NFL to what Justin Fields has done. So, for the Bears, I mean, they can look at this now. They can, to use the old craps term, they can bet on the come, and they can think like, hey, we're going to draft Marvin Harrison and we believe in Fields, but don't not believe your eyes, and don't not believe the production and the stats and the win-loss total with Justin Fields as your quarterback. So to me, I got to be honest. We were talking to Courtney Cronin on the radio the other day. She covers the Bears for ESPN. I agree with her. What Courtney said is the Bears have already made up their mind. I mean, they're taking Caleb Williams. So fans may not like that. The locker room may not like that in Chicago. But as long as the Panthers don't somehow catch fire in the last few weeks of the season, the Bears are going to have the number 1 pick, and the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams, and they're going to move off Justin Fields, and they're going to trade him for the best pick they can possibly get. And you're right, there's a lot of similarities because you got 2 quarterbacks that have kind of divided the fan base, but for the Cardinals, they're just in a different spot, both contractually, both from the fact they're not going to have the opportunity to pick Williams or May if things stay the way they are right now. It'd be real interesting if the Patriots won a game here, and all of a sudden the Cardinals had the opportunity to take Drake May. And then I'm coming back on your show, and we're going to talk all about it all spring long, what the Cardinals are going to do.
It would be the Josh Rosen, Kyler Murray war that seemed like it was fought at least. And on the backside of it, like, people just forget. It was so many people who were basically like, no, Josh Rosen's here, you just got to have this. And now looking in hindsight, a lot of those arguments just seem kind of dumb. And I do think that we're probably going to have that same thing happen with Chicago, where a lot of people are going to look at the Justin Fields, look at these quarterbacks, and realize, yeah, you know what? It was probably better for them to move off, at least, whether it came to field vision or passing. I think that would be, now the interesting thing to me would be that Packers defense, they just got ripped up by Tommy DeVito, who, of course, as we all know, is definitely a quarterback who just, oh my gosh, and just the entire area, at least, of having that story is a great story, but it's also a place of recognizing that, like, this is a really, really bad Packers defense to the point where they're probably going to have to move on for the most part. They play the Panthers this week. The Panthers are basically 1 game ahead in terms of the tanking from the Cardinals and from the Patriots. They are probably not going to win a game the rest of the season. Arizona's best shot to probably win a game, like, unless the Eagles and Matt Patricia essentially just completely self-destruct, and I don't think that team has that mentality.
The Cardinals are not winning in Philadelphia. No. Chicago's probably the best chance, but like the
easily
NFL.
The best chance. They've got the weaker strength of schedule compared to Arizona. If the Carolina Panthers win 1 game, they're still going to end up with that number 1 overall pick for the most part. Like you said, it would be the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick. Could he beat the Jets one last time? Would the Cardinals then lose out the rest of the season, which of course would bring up more questions, I would think, about Kyler Murray down the stretch as well, because they couldn't get a game in their last 4. That would definitely be something that would be interesting as far as a narrative coming into the following season. It's a what have you done for me lately type of league. I've kind of felt similarly, I think, where if they pick number 1 and pick number 2, I don't think it would be as difficult to move off of Kyler Murray as something, because there's just not quarterbacks that are there in the National Football League. There never is enough. We've always seen teams have been able to at least take on or take a shot at different quarterbacks. Someone like Atlanta obviously could take a look at Justin Fields and say, we've got some weapons already. You're a guy who can run the football. Let's go ahead and put you into this rushing offense with Bijan Robinson and try to see if we can make the playoffs. The teams, at least, that need the quarterbacks the most usually don't already have a guy who's paid that's on their team, at least like Arizona has. A lot of times you'll see these quarterbacks who are on rookie deals get moved to a different team, and then sometimes you'll see, all right, this is why that team has moved on. I would not have an issue with Chicago moving on and taking a Caleb Williams. I wouldn't have an issue if they ended up liking Drake May more, depending on how their coaching staff felt about the different quarterbacks. But again, it's something that when it comes to the National Football League, you both have your quarterback is affected by both the offense and defense, and your quarterback affects how the play goes. And so that decision is just recognizing, like, there's going to be up years, there's going to be down years. There's going to be up and down games. We were talking about Dak Prescott, at least, was like, oh, he's the clear MVP favorite, and then they play the Bills. Now you're talking Josh Allen. You have to look past some of those types of individual matchups and look at the broad body of work. And I think when it comes to this Bears team, and maybe it's looking at the history and context of Chicago, there's not a lot of confidence, I feel like, in this coaching staff to keep moving forward with whatever quarterback they get. It does feel like that it could be time for a new approach in Chicago. Their defenses play better, obviously. They got more talent, but there seems to be enough blown leads that we've had in Chicago that it really does feel like that they're going into this season with a coaching deficit, which is different from the Cardinals maybe having a talent deficit that we've seen for the bulk of their work this season. What have you felt like as far as with Chicago? What's the temperature coming out of there when it comes to Matt Eberflus and the, I guess you can say, much maligned offensive coordinator Luke Getsy?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're 5-9, but they had three historic blown leads where the probabilities of wins were like in the high 90s, and they did it. I mean, to do it once and to lose the game would be, frustrating. To do it three times in the last, month and a half or whatever it is, has been extremely bordering on the ridiculous. Now, but you are what your record says you are, right? There's none of this like, oh, they're really an 8-6 football team. They just couldn't close. No, they couldn't close, and that's why they were a 5-9 football team. As me, I grew up in Chicago, so I am well versed in Bears football, and they've got an ownership issue there. There are not strong people running that franchise, and there have not been strong people running that franchise for a very, very long time. Not since George Halas died, to be quite candid. Jerry Vinisi was a general manager there back in the 80s, and Jim Finks. Those two guys were pretty good. But other than that, I mean, when the McCaskey family has their hooks in this franchise from a decision-making standpoint, whether it be to hire the GMs or to make football decisions, it's been a disaster. Blake, I don't think there's any doubt that they need to move on from Matt Eberflus. I mean, come on. We've all seen enough now. And if you're going to make a clean break at the quarterback position, like to me, the dream scenario as a Bear fan, grew up a Bear fan, would be Jim Harbaugh and Caleb Williams to come in. And Harbaugh is a former Bear quarterback. He was a first-round pick in 1987. There's a history there. Everything I've read or heard about Harbaugh is he's ready to move on from Michigan after the college football playoff wraps up. To me, but I don't know what Jim Harbaugh thinks of the McCaskies, and I don't know what the McCaskies think of Jim Harbaugh. It might be a non-starter. That I don't know. But for me, that would make sense. And even if it's not Harbaugh, I still think you need to move on from Matt Eberflus. I just think at some point, right? At some point, whether or not you got what it takes to be a head coach in this league. And there's enough data points on this guy to know that it's time to move on. And you got an opportunity to take perhaps a generational quarterback in Caleb Williams. I think you got to do it, and you got to put him with an offensive staff and a head coaching and a head coach and his staff that's competent, and you set sail on a new day in Bears football, because it's been, outside of a few years here and there. I mean, they went to the Super Bowl in the mid 2000s, and
as I say, the mid 2000s and then 85. It's going to be 40 years since that 85 Bears team, and you can't still keep clinging to this 40 years old type of approach.
They went to the Super Bowl. They went to the Super Bowl under Rex Grossman, and Grossman had arguably the worst Super Bowl performance by a quarterback in NFL history. I mean, it was absolutely dreadful in the rain there. They went to the NFC Championship game and lost to the Packers with Jay Cutler at quarterback in 2010. So they've had some decent seasons, but for the most part, yeah. I mean, people in Chicago, you still cling to the 85 Bears. It's like, give me a break. Like, you're right. You're approaching 40 years on that now. Even the 85 Bears are probably sick of talking about the 85 Bears, unless they're getting paid to make an appearance. Then they're probably not sick of it at all. But okay. and again, it goes back, and you talk about the quarterback position. I mean, has there ever been a more snake bit organization at the quarterback position? I mean, you look back almost 100 years, they've had really like two good quarterbacks. I mean, I'll put McMahon in there. A lot of people don't. Gambo and I go back and forth on this all the time. And he's wrong, by the way. I saw McMahon play every game. Gambo was in New York. Probably saw about 4 games. You can't just look at McMahon's statistics. You got to watch the games and the leadership and the playmaking and the clutch performances. Jim McMahon, when healthy, was a really good quarterback.
Yeah, and then doing it in the Windy City, like that's a difficult thing to do in general. Like Cardinals play in an indoor stadium. There's sunny days, at least for the, even at Sun Devil Stadium, it
Right.
would be hot. But in Chicago, like, you're going to have to face the elements. It does make you normally stronger as a team, but it does impact all of these new quarterbacks throwing the ball in domes, which we've seen has just made statistics explode across the NFL. It is a different type of mentality. And it's also, this is a mentality where we've seen the Blackhawks be able to at least obviously get their rings. We've been able to see a team like the Cubs finally overcome what they needed to. It's this curse for years and years. And of course, we're talking about Chicago, of course. You have the GOAT, had 6 rings at least while he was there in his time. This is a Bears team, at least, that really has had a lot of loyal fans throughout the years, but
Oh
is
yeah.
looking for a way to reward that loyalty. And like the best way you can do that usually is you have a star of the sport wearing that quarterback jersey that you're able to walk around the city and be proud of. That's one of those areas in Chicago that's been a struggle for them for who knows how many years. And it's ironic that it may not even be their pick, but it may be the Panthers essentially mismanaging things more that would be putting them in this type of a situation where we're talking about a Bears team that coaching staff is fighting for their life. Maybe it's not even a choice at this point for the most part. You're just kind of playing for your next job against this up and coming Cardinals team who, if I was them, would probably be smelling a chance at their last win of the year. And this is one of the places where I think that Chicago, and we can talk about this at least. It's the giving season, so I think there's at least a point of giving at least some props to someone we haven't talked about yet, which is Michael Bidwell, who coming into this year was probably at least only overshadowed by the owner who was selling his team, as far as for people is calling him like the worst owner in football. People were saying all these different areas and things. And I
Mhm.
think what we've seen instead was they made some of these decisions, the right decisions, whether it was the GM and cleaning house, being able to bring in a whole fresh new thing, bringing on a coach at least who got to bring and hire his own guys. That's one of these things where Chicago at least probably needs to make those types of decisions moving forward and not kind of keep clinging to the coach you paid or keep clinging to some of these decisions or cling to the quarterback. That's one of those moves I think that they'll have to kind of overcome themselves, set that ego aside, and be able to make what's the best decision in terms of the future. And we've seen at least Arizona, like, they at least have optimism moving forward because of making some of those difficult decisions.
It was a tough year for Mike Bidwell. I think Mike Bidwell
So
will be the
tough.
first person to tell you that, right? I mean, it began with the report card that just embarrassed the organization. The Terry McDonough thing is hanging over his head. The way he, reportedly has treated staff, the burner phone issue, which could have league implications. There's the losing, obviously, the extensions to Kingsbury and Kime, which remember, Blake, nobody could believe he did it in the first place.
Yep.
And of course, everybody turned out to be exactly right.
Yep.
So I mean, it just and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there were other issues, but those are just the ones off the top of my head. And I got to tell you, like are Mike Bidwell and I friends? No, we're not friends. Are we friendly? Absolutely. And I always tell people, I always judge people about how they treat me. And Mike Bidwell has always really been a nice guy. I mean, I've always appreciated talking to Mike. I've appreciated the way he's handled himself in the media with me, whether it be interviews or just casual conversation. So, like the guy that's been described, it doesn't mean that he hasn't been a tyrant behind the scenes. I mean, I don't know. I didn't work there. Um, but it's interesting to me because he seems like a great guy that's been committed to winning. And his first several years taking over from his father, I mean, there was a Super Bowl and there was a new stadium and there was the NFC Championship game and there was Kurt Warner and Carson Palmer and
Mm-hmm.
free agency and Steve Keim making trades and getting Palmer and I mean they seem to have it cooking. And just lately, it's just all gone down the toilet. And sticking with Steve Keim for so long, when it was clear a change needed to be made for really maybe non-football reasons
Yeah.
as much as football reasons. So Mike, it's almost like the Mike star has fallen, and I know that bothers him. And I would like to think that would be the opportunity for Mike to push the star back up again, and whether that's spend money in free agency or be a better person to his staff and employees. We saw the Cardinals try to do that by flying everybody to LA
Yep.
on the plane and taking the employees to LA for the weekend. So
Kids
hopefully,
room, got a brand new kids room. I know that Cameron Cox has also been kind of documenting different pieces that they've seen of the
yeah,
Cardinals making
yeah, and maybe they're not
improvements. And
right. Maybe they're not charging people for lunch anymore, or whatever
I
the
think it
hell
was,
they,
yeah, for
they were
dinner. I
doing.
think it was, at least, because lunch everyone's going to get provided, but if you're staying that long, maybe for extra work or other places, like,
So
and
if
again, the
all this is made, if
perception
all
of,
this is,
it's
yeah, I was
perception
going to say, if
based.
all this has made
Yeah,
Mike a better owner, it probably would have been better if it never happened in the first place. But if we can come out of this as a community, a football community, better, then maybe it was good that Mike got exposed and got embarrassed a little bit as an owner and a person. If ultimately change comes out of it, and out of adversity comes growth, which oftentimes happens in any walk of life, Blake. So
yeah,
we'll see. It's going to be. I'm actually excited for the next 3 or 4 years of Cardinal football, because I
yeah.
think there's an opportunity here to. That division looks like a beast. I mean, the
Yeah.
49ers are going to be a pain in
Rams are
the ass.
rebuilding into the playoffs, it looks like, at least from how they've been playing the last month. So the Seahawks even get a last second win to stay in the race. And Cardinals are there at the bottom of the division without a division win so far this season. But I agree with you that it's not necessarily everyone's going to have mistakes they'll make. There's going to be issues. People are going to get embarrassed. That star is going to fall. We even see it on the field happen with players. Cornerbacks will get beat. Quarterbacks are going to not see an underneath defender. I think how you respond to a lot of that adversity ends up being
Yeah.
the most important part. And I think what we've seen in places like Chicago or other spots, for the most part, like, they've kind of got that decision and opportunity ahead of them. We've seen at least some of the errors or other issues that had popped up. One of the biggest ones that I can think of, at least, of going into the last season of Matt Nagy, going out and getting a quarterback, and then forcing the quarterback onto more of a defensive head coach, to the point where last year you could at least say that the Bears were clearly tearing stuff down. And now you're entering this year, you're like, all right, people are talking about keeping a quarterback versus one of these really talented guys coming out and keeping the head coach. There's a lot, at least, of being able to make some of those similar mistakes and recognizing, when you've got something good, keeping it. When you've got something that
Yeah.
needs to be moved on, you got to move on from it. And I think a lot of Cardinals fans, it's hard to say, because Michael Bidwell, the more less that someone is usually in the press as an owner, is usually more favorable to how people. It's like the president. Whoever's president at the time, they're lower. They're gonna have terrible ratings because everyone likes to be able to look at that person a lot of times and say this is the cause or the root of a lot of how I personally feel. A lot of Cardinals fans are like, hey, Michael's not been in the news for something negative about the Cardinals. That makes me feel better about him, which is not a fair place to be when you're essentially, one of these 32 owners who's having to kind of
Yeah.
captain this ship, and one of the longest standing owners, at least family wise, in the league, up there with the Hallis family, obviously. I think that a lot of the confidence that you need to have, at least, it does start from the top down. I do firmly believe leadership starts from the top down. And that's something that right now, from what we've seen when it comes to the decisions in Arizona, we've at least seen a growth from this team, despite not being a good football team, versus this kind of underwhelming Bears team that seemed like it should have been making more of a push for the playoffs, that has kind of fallen flat of expectations and losing games that they clearly should have won.
Yeah, and Blake, I think tomorrow. I've talked about this on the radio. Having spent many of a cold December Sunday in Chicago, I don't care. People are like, "Hey, the weather's not supposed to be bad. It'll be bad." And
Yeah.
it's a late kick. It's a 3:25 kick, and I've seen so many teams. And I worked in Green Bay too, so I've seen this both at Soldier Field and Lambeau Field. When warm weather teams come in late December, losing teams that aren't very good, and teams with nothing to play for, man, that weather becomes a factor, and it impacts their will and desire to be out there playing a football game, and they get rolled. So I don't know if that's going to happen to the Cardinals. I'm not saying this is going to happen to the Cardinals. I don't make those kind of predictions, but it's something that concerns me going into this football game, because the Bears, I mean, the Bears are at home. It's Christmas Eve. They're with their families. They're used to that weather. The Cardinals are on the road. It's Christmas Eve. They're not with their families. It's freezing cold. It's wet. It's rainy. They stink. They got nothing to play for. You could see this thing get away from the Cardinals tomorrow. I hope that's not the case. And Blake, before we get out of here, I do want to go back to one thing. If somehow the Patriots do win a football game and the Cardinals are sitting there at number 2, the one X factor that we don't know about, we can sit on the radio or do podcasts and talk about Drake May. we don't know what Monty Ossenfort thinks of Drake May.
Yep.
Monty Ossenfort may think Drake May is just a guy and Kyler Murray's way better. Monty Ossenfort may think Drake May is actually better than Caleb Williams and is the next Tom Brady. I mean, so this is going to be, if he's got the opportunity at 2 to take Drake May, then it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out with Kyler. Can they move Kyler? Can they get off the contract? Or they may have number 2 and they may still take Marvin Harrison Jr. Because again, we throw these scenarios out like take Drake May, take him. We don't know what Monty Ossenfort, how he's evaluated Drake May. I mean, that's a pretty big piece to this discussion. He may think Drake May is going to be a 5-time All-Pro, 3-time Super Bowl winner and is absolutely the best college quarterback prospect he's seen in 10 years. Or he may think, you know what, I'm not impressed. And even if we're picking 2, we're sticking with Kyler. I don't think May down there in Chapel Hill is very good at all and doesn't translate to the next level. So all these are great for sports radio and podcasts and discussions and ESPN and all those shows, and everybody talks about this. Is all that matters is what that bald-headed dude in the corner office in Tempe at the Cards facility thinks of these guys. And at the end of the day, he's going to make the decision, and he's going to live or die on that hill, and we'll all be there to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, you want maximum drama. Like, let's say that the Panthers win 1 game out of their next 2, and you go into the last week of the season with 3 teams at 3-11 for the number 1 pick. As far as maximum drama would go, that would be like one of those interesting cases to see what would go on. But I agree with you in that this is kind of, for me, almost a no-brainer. If you're picking 1 or 2, you're probably going to be able to get something back from Murray. I think that the reason where if the Cardinals are in that spot, like you said, it would come down to the grade. And at least to kind of answer, there's a question that popped up from Charles Coriel. He said, who would you rather have taking contract into account? My thing with contracts has always been there is a set price for quarterbacks. And for at least consistent, like call it top 10, top 15, whatever you want to say, you show and flash something on your rookie deal, you're going to get a sizable contract at some point. It's just going to be when you're going to pay that contract is going to be a big factor. And that's something where, at least for me, it's all right. You may end up pushing the contract back a bit if you take a Drake May, but I think you're going to have to pay him. You're going to have to pay him anyway. You're not going to have someone who's going to just take a discount for the heck of it for years and years. So then it comes down to who do you evaluate is the better quarterback? And I think it may not even matter sometimes, what Monty Ossenfort may think. What matters is that he's right. He's going to be there. If he has a decision, it'll
That's
be
what I mean.
one. If he doesn't have that decision to make, then you're like, hey, can Kyler get the ball at least to Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., and we see this Cardinals team add defense, make a way to the playoffs? I could see that being a vision that you can do as well. It comes down to, at the end of the day, a lot of people, I think, in football just want to see their team go out and be able to win on Sunday, regardless of the steps and the process behind that makes it happen. And I think that with Arizona and with Chicago even, you want to see some of these steps in this process be a part of it. Now, when it comes to this actual game on the football field, there's 2 things that I think that stand out. One is how similar this Cardinals offense and this Bears offense is. You've got these quarterbacks, at least, who are more mobile, can make plays, and you've got these defenses who could not be any more different when it comes to stopping the run. The Bears have given up the least amount of yards running the ball in the NFL this season. Teams have been throwing it on them instead. Only 80 yards a game, and the Cardinals are a run-first team. It worked last week against the San Francisco 49ers, who have been relatively stout against the run. They were missing, obviously, some of their key players. It feels to me, Tim, that this is probably a game that if the Cardinals are going to be in this game, it would have to be a coaching advantage and taking advantage of the Bears, and Justin Fields especially making a turnover while not giving the ball away themselves.
Yeah, forcing turnovers, which the Cardinals really have not done a whole lot lately. Getting to the quarterback, which they definitely have not done that lately. It's funny, Blake, for the second week in a row, the Cardinals are going up against the number 1 rushing defense in the league, right? So the 49ers had that mantle last week, and thanks to the Cardinals, they dropped to number 3, and now the Bears are number 1. So I know the 49ers, as you mentioned, were missing a couple of defensive linemen, but I think if you're Drew Petzing and Jonathan Gannon, the game plan has to be, so what? We know you're the best at that, but we're pretty good at it too. And we just did it against the number one defense last week. We're going to try to do it again this week. And you factor in the elements and the weather and the fact that the Cardinals can't complete passes to wide receivers, apparently. Yeah, it's going to be a steady dose of DeMercado and James Conner out there at Soldier Field on Sunday night. And I say night because, man, it's gonna be dark by halftime out there, and it's going to be cold and miserable, and it's going to lend itself to running the football. Cold doesn't really affect throwing the football. Wind it does, and I don't know how windy it'll be at Soldier Field, but yeah, that's the game plan for the Cardinals. And if you can force a turnover and maybe get a decent play on special teams to sway the game at some point, they can certainly win the football game, Blake. There's just no question about it. If I had to make a prediction, I would say this to me looks like it's going to be a Bears win for all the stuff I talked about earlier. They're probably a better football team. They're at home. It's Christmas Eve. It's cold. It's dark. It's windy. Cardinals, nothing to play for. They're on the road. I just don't like the way it looks going in, and I could obviously be wrong.
Right. No, and again, this is one of those places where we talk about the Bears and we look at them and say, yeah, they should win. And I think then we see, wow, they probably should be blowing this Cardinals team out, scoring 30 points on them. This is a run-heavy team. Roshan Johnson's going to be probably getting the rock a whole ton. And instead, we've seen the Bears kind of either let teams come back or just struggle to try to get these wins. The Minnesota Vikings game, everyone's like, oh, look, it was a great win in division. You're like, they kicked field goals and Josh Dobbs turned the ball over 4 times. Like, that's one of those games. Now
they completed one big pass to get that,
and it was like, yeah, they got the big pass. They could have very easily had that pass go down and not been able to score. And again, for the Cardinals' sake, they've not been able to take advantage of the 3 turnovers from CJ Stroud, a chance to win at the end of the game. I think this would be more of like a 24-19 type of a game, at least, where I have Chicago winning. I just don't have enough confidence in this coaching staff and with the bizarre weather to think that someone's going to get to 30 points, even if they probably should in terms of being able to just run on this Cardinals team. While I also feel like with Arizona, we've just seen at least that they've been able to run the ball, but again, you're going up against a slightly healthier team and a team that probably feels like they should be able to go and beat Arizona. And you're going into this one where I think it comes down to with DJ Moore on the other side and being able to run the ball versus Arizona just having to feed the only thing they really have in Trey McBride with no Hollywood. I've got the Bears at least winning this week for the most part and not impacting their number 1 overall pick because that's the Panthers, but at least being able to have more of a showcase potentially of Justin Fields for another team to look at and maybe seeing how their coaching staff responds to a Cardinals team that, from what we've seen, has done a very good job of game planning in the first halves of games so far this season.
I'll tell you what, Blake, for a Week 16 game on Christmas Eve against 2 of the worst teams in the NFL, there's a lot of intrigue. I'm really looking forward to it. As you can see, I've got a vested interest in both organizations. Keep in mind, we talk about Trey McBride, one of Justin Fields' best weapons, Cole Kmet, and last check is questionable for the game. So that would hurt the Chicago passing attack if the big tight end out of Notre Dame.
Yeah, Robert Tonyan was dropping passes last week that he had wide open too, and you're just like,
that was ugly. That was ugly.
It's the weapons versus quarterback argument. Like at the end of the day, at least teams got to go out there, find a way to will themselves to win the game. That'll be at least it for us here with the, I almost said the old name of the podcast. Now this is the Redbird Reboot podcast. Tim, thanks again for joining. If you want to do a shout out to where other people can not just find your work and content, I appreciate that. It's hard to miss you because you're just pretty much everywhere this Christmas
Well, especially season. This time of year, all those jokers at 98.7 take their vacation. So I end up doing Burns and Gambo, and I do Wolf and Luke, and I do Bickley and Murata. And then I come back and do Suns game. So in case anybody doesn't know by now that we're 28 games into the Suns season. This year, 98.7 has added Suns pre-games that we come on a half hour before Bloomer and TK come on. So it's an additional half hour of Suns pregame coverage. It's a show called Here Come the Suns. So that comes on an hour before tip-off each and every game. And then also this year, Blake, in years past, Bloomer did the post-game show with the phone calls and all that good stuff, but he only did it after home games. This year we've expanded that, so we're doing post-game call-in shows after home and road games. which is why I was there last night at the station, until about midnight because the game tipped off at 8 o'clock. But it's really exciting, and I'm really happy. And we're getting a lot of phone calls, no matter if it's 11:30 at night or no matter what time the game ends when they're on the road. So that's been cool. And then obviously the Cardinals, only 3 more games, but Cardinals NFL Game Day comes on 4 hours before each and every game. We do an hour pregame show, and then Cardinals Overtime comes on after Cardinals Talk, and I continue to take phone calls. Craig Grillo does a great job with Cardinals Talk, and then once those guys wrap up, I come on, and the phone calls keep coming, and we commiserate. Sometimes we celebrate, but not all that often the last couple of years. We pretty much commiserate and try to figure out what's wrong with the Arizona Cardinals. So also, and check out my podcast if you haven't done that, Arizona Football Daily. We do that pretty much every day. Mike Jarecki and I kick it around Cardinal talk and what's going on in the National Football League. And we do some other sports as well. So, Blake, always appreciate it, my friend. Anytime you need me, give me a shout.
Yep, good to have you on as well, Tim. Always appreciate you coming and sharing all of the knowledge, especially when it comes to talking all things, at least with Arizona sports and even Chicago sports. Just a perfect crossover for this week. I'm at Blake Murphy 7. Marcos and I will actually be back on Sunday doing a live reaction, at least, to the game. We're not going to have the game playing, but we will be at least watching the game on our own and doing some live reactions to it. First time we've ever tried something like this. We'll probably do it just once this year because everyone else in the holiday spirit is going to be opening up and wrapping their last-minute presents. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and go Cardinals. This has been the Redbird Reboot. It's time to log off.